Hey Last Looks crew, greetings and salutations. I hope everyone out there is doing their best to get through those long shoot days, yeah? Driving safely back from those crazy locations, yeah? And making sure that work-life balance is being considered, yeah? Well, I hope so. My name's Jamie Lee, and I'm currently gearing up for my next project as the hair designer on a film here in LA. And I'm so stoked that I will be working with a dear friend and colleague of mine, makeup artist Sarah Rubano. When I caught up with Sarah on the podcast, she was down in Aotearoa, New Zealand, elbows deep, in the latest Avatar film. We have all sorts of wild and wonderful people in our line of work. Well, Sarah is one you'll find yourself gravitating towards. Her kind nature and full positive vibe is definitely one you want to be around on set, especially when it's a challenging shoot. And you can see from her work she is one talented lady. Our wonderful Rubano really is pretty special, and I'm so amped to be embarking on this next adventure together. The last time we worked full-time on something was a few years back now in good old Cincinnati. Shout out to our keys, Jody and Scott. How you doing, guys? This episode is one from the Last Looks vault. I believe it deserves another spin around the block, and maybe it's a first-time listen for some of our new Last Looks crew. So enough from me, on with the show.
Pictures up.
Last looks. Rolling.
And action.
Welcome to the Last Looks podcast, Sarah.
Thank you, Jamie Lee.
Nice to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled. I'm honored, of course.
Hey, now I would like you to finish this sentence for me, okay?
Okay.
Once upon a time, there was a girl named Sarah, and when she grew up, she wanted to be...
Wanted to be creatively realized in some way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was the first thing little Sarah did to make that happen?
Well, oh my goodness. It's just from where I'm sitting right now, there's just so many things that stacked up leading to where I am right now. But, I think my first influence as a child, my first creative influence was my mother. She was, of course, an Avon lady, which was delightful as a child because I had those tiny little mini lipsticks to play with. All those little Avon samples. You remember those. And so she would have her little kit that she would take from house to house. And of course, my grubby little fingers would get into that little kit on a daily basis. So that was an influence early on. And also, she made all of the clothes that we wore. So she was quite a wonderful seamstress. And I would watch her do that. And, it was like watching an alchemist, it was magical to see her with a flat piece of fabric. And all of a sudden it turned into a beautiful little apron or skirt or, little top. And so, that was quite amazing for me to watch as a little girl. So that would be my first creative influence as a child, I would say.
That's very cool. And then, So going through schooling and growing up and getting into your teens, what direction did you end up going in then?
Yes. So I went to college and I was born in Connecticut, but then moved to California in 1980. So I was in elementary school and went to school. We moved to Riverside, Loma Linda, Redlands area. So that's like an hour east of Los Angeles. And that's where I went to high school. And then I went to university in Riverside. And at the time, I was limited by the choices that I had at that university. It was more geared towards pre-med students. I think my reason for going there was staying with my friends. So, but I knew at that point that I wanted to move into a creative realm. So my focus was communications, Bachelor of Arts, and I took every class I could within the realm of creative writing, television study, editing, photography, just anything that university offered in the way of creative courses, I immersed myself into. And I wasn't sure exactly, how it was all going to manifest and what roads would present. But I finished my term there. And so I do have a Bachelor of Arts in Communications. Writing was a focus for me for quite some time. But after college, moved out to Los Angeles and started working to pay rent. And that meant working as a waitress and doing all the odd jobs to just make ends meet, as we all did in our early 20s, late teens. And being in Los Angeles, of course, you're just in and amongst an incredible community of artists of all types, musicians, actors, all the technicians that we are familiar with on a film set and a television set. And so I started developing friends within all of those arenas. And it was so exciting and so dazzling just to see how the creative fields could blossom and grow and opportunity within each of those areas. So I pretty quickly had my eyes set on costuming and makeup. I knew those were areas that I wanted to develop and had, heartfelt interest in, but wasn't sure exactly how to get there. And so at that stage, simultaneous to all of that all those interests starting to peak and perk up, I got a job as a production assistant on a television show called Relativity. So that was like the early 90s. And it was all administrative, but because I had just come from, college study, I felt, really honed in my administrative skills, which was very helpful. So that was my foot in the door. And I told the producers, once I got to know them and the office coordinators, this is just temporary. This is just so I can, get my foot in the door. And I want to, if there's any opportunity, move down into the costume department or down into makeup department, because a 2-story building and in Culver City. And that's where, the makeup department was set up and costume department was set up. But because it was union and I was not union, they said, well, that's going to be impossible because you'd have to be in the union to be involved in those departments. But, I still would just poke my head in every chance I could get just to see, the inner workings and ask 1.5 million questions and bug them like crazy. And so that little period was about 6 months. And I met a art department lady, Awana Bogdan, who was moving on to one of the Godzilla films, the one with Matthew Broderick. And so that one was actually, I think, released in 98, but the pre-production was that for those films probably started in 95, 96. So she asked me to come over to work in the Creature Shop and run the office there. And so I was, of course, delighted because it was a step closer to, it was opportunity to work within a creative environment. And even though my responsibilities would be more administrative, I was basically immersing myself into a collection of artists that were just like the best in the business. It was essentially a who's who of makeup effects people, Gino Acevedo, and I would go and just talk to him and watch him paint, Gabe Bartales, Jose Fernandez, and I would sit there and watch him sculpt and ask him questions and get pointers. Tom Flouts and, Steve Wang, Marilee Kanega, incredible fabricator. And so all of those people were working in that building run by Patrick Tatopoulos, who was, of course, the creature designer. And we worked in that building for over a year. And within that time, there was a lot of self-study, and I just immersed myself in that world and the influence that those artists had on me during that period was actually life changing,
Yeah.
because it opened up this, I was able to see what these creatives were able to do, you know, like with their talent, but how they were able to contribute to storytelling with, just building things with their hands. And so at that point I was hooked. I wanted to be in that world, in that bubble. And after that film ended, Marilee Knig had me do some apprentice work with her. And so she carried on doing some projects with Patrick Tatopoulos, and I would go on and do work with her. And she was just very patient, and what I loved about, specialty costuming and fabrication is that, and really with anything creative, is there's no rule book.
Yeah.
Every job is so different.
Mm.
And even if you're getting to a very similar end result, how you get there is going to be different for every single job. And so that early chapter of fabrication really helped me with thinking outside the box,
Mm.
and learning to be a bit of a MacGyver of
Yeah.
sorts, and finding that I was actually really good under pressure when there was no rule book. And so there was a period of that type of self-discovery. So for a while I continued developing in that area. I had the wonderful opportunity to work, over at Henson's, the Jim Henson Company under Julie Zobel.
That's
And then, of
awesome.
course, K&B with Beth Hathaway, and then working over at Steve Johnson's when it was, Edge Effects and Masters Effects as well. So I started doing, the makeup effects circuit, and just, learning so much. And in and amongst that, being exposed to a lot of the prosthetic makeup artists that would be working with the fabricators to complete a look. And so looking at that and feeling so amazed by it, because, of course, growing up, I was so blown away by, the star, it's the same story as all of your other prosthetic makeup artists that you've interviewed, watching, the transformation of the Werewolf in London, watching, Harry and the Hendersons, going back to like Land of the Lost and watching, those slee stacks on
Yeah.
that TV series, loving the Jack Pierce stuff, Bride of Frankenstein, and then later, The Abyss and Aliens, and all of that stuff was so exciting. And those were the shows that I really got into. So as I started to get more and more exposure, as I ran from shop to shop, ran the circuit, I just started to see how it all came together and how these characters came to life. And I was dazzled and excited, and just felt like I had found an area that that had no ceiling, like that it was just, the opportunity would be endless. And there were so many wonderful things that I could potentially be a part of. So I just really, Jamie Lee, just put my head down and my bum up, and off I went. So I remember sitting on my couch, and I think it would have been, oh my goodness, early 2000s. And I got a call from Beth Hathaway, and she was, of course, at K&B at the time. And she said, "Hey, we've just been awarded The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Come on over and join the fabrication team." And of course, that was one of my favorite books as a child. And so I just remember that moment, because that was a pivotal moment in my life. I remember sitting there on the couch and getting that call, and that feeling that I got from that opportunity that had just come to me. And of course I said, "Yes, please. When do I start?" And so I started on that, and we prepped for a long time. It was probably at least 6 months of prep.
That's good.
And yeah, it was a long prep and there was a lot to build: centaurs and minotaur bodies, all the muscle structure that, we had to build into those beautiful suits. And so then there was the first wave of people coming over to New Zealand, and Beth was not able to be in that first wave at that time. So she said, Rubano, we need a fabricator. And Howard said, Rubano, come on over. It'll be me, you, and Tammy Lane. And we're gonna be doing the Tumnus character, and there's gonna be a shit ton of hair laying all over his body, and the prosthetics and all of that, which of course Tammy and Howard would be doing. And so I was part of that first wave. And so in 2003, end of 2003, 2004, I started packing for New Zealand. And for a year I was on that project. It was almost a year of shooting and then shooting in New Zealand for The Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe. And that for me was where everything shifted. And basically I felt like, I had danced around makeup and prosthetic makeup for a decade or so, until Howard Berger said, gave me the opportunity to expand and grow, and basically put some brushes in my hand and say, go for it, girl, do it. And I remember, obviously I had done, some self-study. I had assisted and this and that and the other, but it was the first time that I properly, got to fly solo in application and painting and all of that. And I had the support of Howard. And you know what? Right away, it felt like I was home.
Yeah.
I was like, this is it. This is it for me. And I was good at it right away. I felt confident. I felt excited about my potential. And I felt there was promise there. It was the first time in my life, really, that I just felt like I had something that I could just call a career, that I would work super hard at, to grow as much as I could. And I felt like I had landed there. And from there, I felt like a tiny little seed that was just about to, burst open. So really, that's when, so 2003, 2004, that's where the shift happened for me from, fabrication specialty costume into, makeup.
Yeah. Well, that's so cool, because going from being a PA in the office to them going, no, there's no hope in hell, it's all union, you can't get in there, to then finding that area within the film industry that has that creative side, but you don't need to be in the union to doing it. So you're in the workshops and still creating and being a part of everything, to then luckily going and working on something in another country where you're allowed to pick up those makeup brushes and get into it. So what a journey.
Truly. And, to have Howard and Tammy Lane to be just peering over my shoulder and saying, a little bit more like this, a little bit more like that, no, not like that, like this. Tammy I remember just some of her early thoughts on painting appliances, and I still think of those tips and those notes, and every day when I'm doing my makeups, I still have her voice in my head and Howard's voice in my head. So, I couldn't have been luckier. So there was a lot of work opportunity on the job, and that job in particular, the sheer numbers, what had to come out on the other side of every shooting day was immense. And so we were thrown into situations that were just, it's like sink or swim.
Yeah.
And so the growth and the learning within that period of time was there was a lot of growth. But coming out of that, I knew that there would be a lot to continue learning and needing to take some courses and classes so that I could grow stronger and create more opportunity for myself. So I did that. I kept making the most out of every opportunity, and then a lot of self-motivated study. Yeah.
That's very cool. So how long were you in New Zealand doing that job?
Yeah, so that was all of 2004.
Okay.
And I remember we came home in time for Christmas. So yeah, it was the whole of 2004. Yeah.
And just for those who don't know Sarah, she actually lives in New Zealand now. So
Yeah, I do. I do. On that job, of course, I met my wonderful husband, Joe Dunkley, and he was working for Weta Workshop, and he was one of their on-set supervisors. So, I met him on that, and of course, fell in love, and the rest is history.
match made
So,
in heaven.
yeah, very lucky. We just last night we were talking about, it's been, we're actually coming up on 20 years almost of being together now, in a couple years,
Yeah.
few years, it will be our 20-year anniversary from when we met. And holy shit, we can't believe it.
That's awesome. Yeah, time flies, huh?
Yes, time flies. So, and the wonderful thing about, Joe is not only is he an incredible life partner, but we also, for a period of time, we teamed up and we were
Mm.
sent out. Richard Taylor, especially, gave me so many opportunities. I formed early on a wonderful partnership with Weta Workshop and have great relationships with, Richard and Jason Doherty, who was running the prosthetics department, and all of the team there, Rob Gillies. And so they sent us out, Joe and I as a team, because Joe, his background is painting, prop making, armor, weapons, and the specialty costuming as well. So early on, they saw us as a great, a dynamic duo. So they would send us to the far corners of the planet as a little team. And so we had some wonderful adventures early on as a partnership, young love, but also incredible work opportunities under the Weta umbrella. So yeah, so it was a match made in heaven.
Yeah, that's so cool. It doesn't happen very often that you can, find someone that you can spend your life with, but also can do all that creative stuff with and work together.
Yeah,
It's so cool.
yeah, it is really cool. So we're grateful, and we don't do that much anymore. I've kind of gone off into my area, and he is a 9 to 5 or 8 to 6, I should say, at the workshop, a creative director there and supervising various shows. But he is doing less on set, and of course, I've carried on doing on set projects. So
Yeah, it's a good balance.
yeah, it is. Now that we have dogs, oh yeah.
So, how does that work for you? You've finally got those makeup brushes in your hands, getting into working on set and all that type of stuff, but then you come back to Los Angeles. Does that kind of mess anything up for you because you can't continue to do that in LA because of the union restrictions? Or how did you kind of keep going on your mission?
Yeah, so it was tricky because, I had this incredible onset experience, but then back in LA, to have that type of experience, you have to be in the union. So it's a bit of a pickle, which I had to navigate through. But it was doing some non union work that came along and taking those opportunities, but also Joe and I in 2000, it was 2008, where we got an opportunity to work with director Neil Blomkamp on a project that was non-union, and so we were in South Africa actually. So that was a huge opportunity, and it was such a wonderful experience, and we had such a great working relationship with Neil that we did 2 more films with him.
So, what was the first one? You did District 9, right?
District 9.
Which was, I think, mind blowing for a lot of people. Like, that was such a loved film. Just visually, the story, like everything, it was just fucking crazy.
Yeah. Well, it was, Joe and I we signed on to that project in the 11th hour. We didn't know really what it was going to be. We just knew that there was going to be a massive kit, and we were going to be in charge of everything from, a very big prosthetic makeup all the way through to, all the makeup effects, elements, props that, that were of a makeup effects, flavor. And so we also had guns and we have fabricated suits. So it was a very big kit that we were in charge of.
Yeah.
And when we went over to Johannesburg, we hired locally. So thankfully we had Yaku Snyman and some of his crew come on, and Emil, his brother, who was great with, animatronics and the mechanics behind all that. So, but when we went over there, it was like we had no idea what we were landing into. And we were so young and full of excitement and passion. And I just remember just saying, I'm not afraid of anything. Let's just do it. Let's make it work and let's make it beautiful, and let's put everything we have creatively into this. And we did that. And we had some massive challenges that film, from, the working locations, working in the slums, to, just the conditions of, the trailers were tricky, having a crew that I had never worked with before and relying on their ability to help us get there. It was all quite scary, but also incredibly exciting and stimulating. So we just rocked right through that. But we had no idea, what this project was going to be. Charlton Copley was improving his way through most of it. And I remember finishing, we wrapped, and Joe and I looked at each other and said, whew, wow, what an experience. And what the hell is this going to be? What is this movie going to be?
Yeah.
And so to our delightment, when it did hit the screen, we just, it was all better than what we could have ever imagined. So, yeah.
No, it was very cool. I still remember going to see it and just being like, walking out going, I have not seen a film like that before. That was cool.
Yeah, it was super cool. And of course that got us to, one of the bake-offs with the Academy, which was really exciting and
awesome.
felt like just an incredible honor. So I guess, we formed a very strong relationship with Neil Blomkamp, and his next film was in Vancouver, Canada. And I was also, Charlton and I had a great working relationship as well after all those hours spent transforming him into, as he started to go through that metamorphosis into the alien. So we just got to know each other really well. So on Elysium, we did a couple small little projects here and there. And on Elysium, I was able to come in as an actor request. So that was my breakthrough into the union, which was really important at that time because, of course, opened up a lot of doors. So that was, I think 2011 or so, or 2011 perhaps. Yeah, so I've been in the union for a decade, and it is if you're living in LA, you got to be in the union, as you know, Jamie Lee, and it's a great group of artists, and just the opportunities are wonderful. So that was my step in that direction.
That's awesome. And what kind of work were you doing on that film?
Yeah, so on Elysium, we had a lot of tattoo work. Of course, we had prosthetic work, a lot of makeup effects, gags. But I was doing Matt's makeup every day, and he went through quite a transformation as well, from, well presented and polished. And, I've actually made a career of, it seems I've made a career of visually aiding my characters, my male leads, through all kinds of wild transformations. So, that was another one for me. And yeah, just a pleasure to work with Matt, of course. He's such a pro, and it was yet another honor. But he had that, surgery on the back of his head in the story. And that was probably my first time working with encapsulated silicone. And it was just, a beautiful application. So easy compared to previous applications with, foam and gelatin. They all have the pros and cons, of course, but, the encapsulated silicone is so quick and beautiful and translucent. But also on that project, some of our characters, they're meant to be branded, and it's almost like, someone carrying a Louis Vuitton bag. They themselves, instead of just carrying a prop that's branded and trendy, they were being stamped with branding. And so we were at a workshop. It felt like it was the beginning of generating prosthetics in a 3D format that were then, milled and printed, those molds. And to me, that felt, quite groundbreaking. And the reason for doing that is because that branding needed to look, machined, and all those right angles had to be crisp and clean. And so it couldn't have any kind of organic, feeling to them.
Right.
And we tried to sculpt a few, and there was always that feeling of like, with these intricate patterns, you just can't get there with an organic format. So that was quite cool. And that was some of the work we did on Elysium, which we're proud of course.
Yeah, that's very cool. So with these transformations that you do tend to help your characters go through, how do you kind of map those out? Do you have a way that you do it each time that you approach it, or is it different for each film? Because I mean, you start with your character looking one way, and then by the end of it, that transformation's happened. So do you have a way that you approach that in general?
I do. Of course, every, like I said earlier, every job is unique. And so that process is unique on every project. But what I try to do is when I'm reading a script, I just try to imagine that there is no dialogue in the storyline. So as I'm imagining that, how am I telling the story at these pivotal moments visually? How do I hit the creative notes so that the audience is feeling that layer without it being distracted by it? Mm-hmm. And sometimes you want to be distracted by it, like for Dane DeHaan as the Green Goblin in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, there's a point where he gets injected, and then, the lights start strobing. And now that, obviously that's not going to be a subtle moment, a subtle note in the storyline, but, that's quite jolting moment. But yes, so I try to imagine that there is no dialogue, that it's all just a visual display that, like little things stack up from shading under the eyes to, chapping on the lips and blue around the fingernails and, just what's happening. And all of those things stack up, and the subtleties will have an effect on the audience. And then all of a sudden you're just feeling it. You're in there with them. You're feeling the dismay or the uncomfortable, like the physical uncomfortable, moments that maybe this character's meant to be feeling. So yes, that's pretty much how I do it. I just break down my script in that way and then hit those notes along the way.
That's awesome. Because I know that a lot of the time we don't have the time or kind of resources maybe to test out all those stages that character might go through. So do you have, is it helpful to you to have at least if you can test your beginning stage and your end stage, so you can kind of gauge how that journey is going to go?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I try to do is figure out that end stage. What is it? And I like to break it. I like to visually break it so that the director and the producers and I can look at it and say, we've taken it too far.
Right.
I like to find that point, because if you don't find that point and then work back a little bit from that point, you're not ever sure that you've brought it to its fullest potential, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Yeah, I don't think I've spoken to anyone who has explained it in that way of how they read the script with losing the dialogue. It's very cool, especially because we are in such a visual department. Like, it's what we do. is.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And you actually, there's a question in your conversation bullet points saying something new that I've learned. And and obviously I'm always learning. We're always learning, which is what I love about this industry. Like there's
Hmm.
just no ceiling to it
Yeah.
because things are constantly evolving. But to tie in with what we were just talking about, I feel like what is really becoming apparent to me and resonating with me is trusting my gut instinct,
Mm.
because often there is an authenticity, a truth that comes with that initial gut feeling or that initial gut visual that I have when I'm reading and imagining a character. And so just learning to really trust that and have a confidence, a strong confidence in that, because I guess I feel like often is the case after all the testing and the endless testing, the endless conversations with
Mm.
everybody, the actors, the directors, the producers, the studio, often, and I'm probably helping it along too, but often things come back. It's full circle
Mm.
and things come back to what was in my mind's eye when I first read that script. And I don't, want to be stubborn about my perspective because it's important to explore all of it. But I feel like the guts of it are often where I started with my initial feeling about something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how, and it may not have come up in your career so far, but how have you dealt with, or do you think you would deal with, if you had a really strong gut feeling on something, but the director's gut feeling was in the complete opposite direction?
Yes. Well, that happens and that happens all the time. And you have to just let go.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you have to. What's important is that you articulate your concerns, you express your concerns, or you express your feeling very clearly, like what you feel is the right path. And if they come back and they say, we understand, but this is what it has to be, well, you got to let go.
Yeah.
And so often I am reminded of having to do that. And some people say, hey, well, it's my name that's attached to this project. Well, yeah, and I understand that too. But do that other alternative, that variation to the best of your ability and
Mm.
make that shine as well,
Yeah,
even though it may
exactly.
not be your vision.
Yeah.
Make that great.
Yeah.
And I guess the only thing that plays into that would be, 11th hour kind of shift of plan. And that is the trickiest thing where you've been developing something, and whether it's, an intricate prosthetic makeup or a beautifully knotted wig or whatever it is, where they say, no, we're going to do this now. Well, at that point, there is grave concern because sometimes you just don't have time to make this variation shine. And
Yeah.
so that is a quandary. And that's always going to be a big challenge if and when that does.
Yeah. I think that's just a consistent challenge throughout the industry, is just learning to let
Mm,
go and breathe and be like, it's okay.
yeah.
It's going to be what it's
Yeah.
going to be. I've done my best.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
okay.
Yeah. That's
Can't
right.
freak out over every little thing that happens, or you'd be a mess.
Yeah, you would be. And part of what is exciting for us is this, having to reach into your bag of tricks from, the various experiences you've had and making it work. Like I get a real buzz out of that.
Mm.
And so that's also part of the spark that keeps us going. If everything was beautifully planned to a T all the time, like some of that spirit would dim a little bit, I feel. So a healthy balance
Mm.
of these spontaneous moments where you've got to MacGyver through something, I guess, that's fulfilling for me as well.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
I initially have a knee jerk reaction. Like I want to roll my eyes and go, oh, why? But then
But
the moment that I'm like doing it and I see it
yeah,
start coming together, I'm like, oh no, this is awesome. This is cool. I'm so glad we're doing
yes,
this.
yes. And every now and again, you're working with a visionary, like a director who is, you're like, I didn't see this, but God damn,
Yeah.
that's really good.
Yeah.
And often you do have to trust that because, they often, when, a director is also a writer, they have insights and they've thought about things that actually go beyond, the scope of what we've considered.
Yeah.
So, there's that layer.
No, they're deep, deep into it. And they've been deep into it for a long time. Especially,
Yeah.
as you say, when they've been writing it. Oh my God. It's all they live and
Yeah.
breathe and think about
Yes.
for months on end. So,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, I wanted to touch on Ghost in the Shell because you co-department headed that with the wonderful Jane O'Kane.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, firstly, how was it like helping bring that whole visual to life?
Well, I mean, it was just such a colorful world that we had the pleasure of creating or just being part of the creation of. And, working with Jane O'Kane, she is like a sister to me. And we, our desks were facing each other for over a year and talk about just, a fusion of minds and just the bouncing back and forth. I don't think I could have done that with anybody other than Jane O'Kane.
Yeah.
We just have a very healthy working relationship and just bounced off each other. Both had, our own strengths to offer. And I feel like just together as a team, we are just, able to come at it with a fresh perspective. And then also the ability to bounce off each other. It was a real wonderful way of being able to, check each other and either endorse or help each other down a path, like we were constantly, like it just felt like we were lifting each other all the way through the process. But, of course, it was, such a big process along with art department, working with the DOP and the colors, those bright, beautiful, delicious colors, the costumes, and how eccentric and different those were, and working in this futuristic style, but also with this bend of tradition, like when it came to the geishas, So we're working in the future, but with influence of the past, which, that's pretty much everything anyway. But yeah, it was really interesting to do, futuristic, honoring tradition.
Yeah, that's very cool. So it sounds like there's definitely some benefits of co-department heading
Yes.
with Jane.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so for a project that big, that would be my preference as I've gotten a little bit older. That would, to be perfectly honest, that would be my preference just because you do take some of the load and it's a wonderful way of just cross checking. And there's just a bit more breath between things instead of being so frantic all the way through.
Yeah.
So yes,
That's awesome.
with the right person, it's a fantastic way.
Yeah. I think it's popping up more and more, especially on bigger projects, being able to have that co-department head. And especially because you guys were doing both hair and makeup. So that's, it's definitely going to help.
Exactly.
So I do have to ask, Sarah, because I love asking this question because it is, I think our line of work has so many challenges in so many different areas, but I'd love to know what the most challenging project is that you've worked on so far, whether it be just as a whole the project was challenging or because it had one specific makeup that was super challenging or it was the location. Yeah, what would that be?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's like asking, it's a tricky one because it's like, it would be like asking me, what's your favorite or, food, because they've all been challenging in their own unique way.
Mm-hmm.
Some have been, location challenging, like impossible. Some have been very difficult because of the creative climate and maybe not seeing eye to eye with the director. Some have been tricky because of the cast and maybe having somebody in a prosthetic makeup that wasn't really understanding what the full scope of that meant. And so the challenges attached to that. And then also sometimes, just timeline. sometimes money and not having enough money to get there, but having an ambitious vision and requirements. So it is, it is, it's tricky. It's a tricky question, but I would say that even though, District 9 was the most exhilarating of my careers, it was also the most challenging of my career because we were actually not a part of the prep.
Right.
And it was, as I mentioned, it was a very ambitious kit, including all these, all the many different stages of the prosthetics as Vicus starts to transform. So, to not be a part of that and then to open the boxes in Johannesburg and figure out how we were going to make it all work, that was a hell of a thing.
Yeah.
So, but then also the locations. And during that period in Johannesburg, there was a lot of rioting. So it was dangerous,
Yeah.
so there was that layer in there as well. So I would say, although the most exhilarating, it was also the most horrifying or the scariest, the most challenging and super ambitious. And I think part of it, like I said, is because we weren't involved in the pre-production phase. So
Yeah. Hit the ground running. Oh my God.
yeah. And then we were across the world from from Weta Workshop, who was supplying us the various elements to keep us fed and moving through the production. So,
oh my God. So I feel like it actually ticks a lot of the boxes that you were listing before you answered the question. And that's probably why it's up there.
If I weren't younger and so passionate at the time, I wouldn't have made it through. If I had that challenge now, I don't think I'd make it through. Just leave me here in the slums. That's fine. I'll be fine.
So you keep those projects for the youngins. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So now that you're in a position where you're hiring people and putting teams together for different projects, what are you looking for when you're putting a team together?
Oh, yes. I think people who take initiative is a big thing for me, because often we get so busy and focused on what we're doing. I kind of need people just people know what to do, and they have to be self-motivating and they have to have, intuitive way about their day, what needs to be done when, there's certain things that need to happen every day, all day, do the rounds, make sure everything's good to go. So I think people that take initiative, good work ethics, of course, skilled goes without being said, people who are skilled and confident, but also humble, that's important. And in the realm of humble comes, no fucking drama.
Yeah.
Sorry. Now I put the F word. Oh God. But I do feel,
well, that's true.
I feel passionate about that because, we have a lot to get done over the course of a day and a week and a month. And when there is drama and when team is not supporting team, when my team is not supporting each other, there's a lot of energy put into that. That energy is being pulled out of the creative aspect and the creative process. Yeah. And so it's very upsetting to me when the focus shifts from creative potential and what everyone can do to lift each other and elevate each other to drama and everyone fighting hard for a carrot or just being catty. And so for me, it's very important on my teams. We have a family, unity, that there's, camaraderie and a lightheartedness, but also just a support. And
yeah. There's not enough time for anything else.
No, there's not.
Oh yeah. As you say, energy, it's just exhausting. Like, who wants to deal with that?
Yeah. It's short-sighted is what it is. So, and I don't have time for it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I would love to know, someone wanting to get into your line of work, what advice would you give them?
Well, I think we'll do everything and anything you can in the way of creating in creating opportunities. So that means to study, whether it's self-study, whether it's raising your hand for apprentice work, take classes. If there's something that you love that you've seen in a movie or on a TV show, create it at home. Try to duplicate it, and there'll be so much you learn in that process. And then when you come up, there's so many forums online now where you can, raise your hand and ask a question and get some recommendations, and then go back and try it again, do it again, see if you've learned something. So I think just moving, taking the initiative. And then when you get an opportunity, when you do get an opportunity, everybody does, making the most of it.
Yeah.
Don't say, well, this is not really what I want to do. It's a little different than what I want to do. Well, you know what? This is your opportunity. Make the most of it. That leads to another door. And then that thing leads to another door. And you are in control of your destiny, truly. And honestly, it's like we create our own opportunities, and you have to maximize. So when you do get those opportunities, finish strong. Don't fade at the end of a job. Like, don't get jaded and be like, oh, well, I've proven myself now and I'm tired and I'm frustrated with these things. Finish strong. People will remember you for how things finish up. They will.
That's true.
It's the last.
Yeah. And
don't fade at the end of a job. Finish. Yeah.
And that, just because, as you're saying, that journey may not be, you're direct from A to B, but you need to kind of go off on a little side journey every now and again to get to where you're going. Think of all the stuff you're going to learn. Like, you're just constantly going to be learning other things that will help you at the end of the day.
And Jamie Lee, I'm a perfect example of that and my whole journey. And I will tell you that even to this day, I'm using my fabrication skills in the makeup arena, pattern making, with prosthetics. It's everything that we experience leading up to our next thing. It's all helpful.
Yeah.
And, going to college and, that was my path. And all of those administrative skills that I learned through my studies, they have been so valuable for me as a department head.
Oh my God,
because, that's a big part of it. You can be creatively like genius, but if you're running a department and if you're not communicating well with the director, with the producers, if you're not able to budget for your line producer, well, then you're not ticking that box. So then maybe perhaps department heading isn't for you. So that was important for me too. All those administrative skills, the filing, the everything. So yeah, make the most out of everything, truly.
That's awesome. And I feel like I don't think I know the answer to this question, but what do you love most about what you do?
Oh, goodness. I think just the color and diversity with the creative, with the creative aspect of it.
Yeah.
The people connection, people from all over the world. I've had incredible opportunity to travel, working with extraordinary humans, from extraordinary directors to extraordinary performers, extraordinary artists. People who love to storytell, who are the best in the biz and who are living their fullest potential. So to be in and amongst that is so inspiring. I do love that. And I love being a part of storytelling. I love being a successful artist. I feel like it's a real privilege. Being a successful anything in this day and age is tricky. But to be a successful artist, I feel honored and grateful and privileged. And, for all of those reasons. Yeah.
That's very cool. I love it. It's a perfect answer. Well, I think it comes through in just this whole time I've been talking to you. That's why I was just like, I feel like I know the answer to this question, but just through how you've spoken about your work and how passionate you are about creating. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's awesome.
Yeah. No, thank you, Jamie
You
Lee.
haven't gone bitter yet, lady. It hasn't happened yet.
Well, yeah, no.
No,
As soon as that happens, we all have our moments, of course.
of
But as
course.
soon as that happens, it's time to shift gears. So I feel a lot of love in my heart for what I do.
That's
So,
awesome. Now, throughout the last 20 years of doing what
mm.
it is that you do, what have you noticed in the industry that has changed?
Yeah, I mean, oh goodness, within the technology of makeup and prosthetic makeup,
Mm,
the technology has changed, and now that we're working with silicone a lot more than at the early days when I first got involved. But in a larger scope, film has moved to digital. So now we're at 8K.
mm,
So, moving to HD, of course, the rise of VFX, but also I do feel like there are a lot of directors wanting to come back to practical. I do feel like that's happening to a certain degree.
mm,
I have just finished two films back to back with a prominent indie filmmaker, Ty West, and he's known for his horror films, but they're quite clever and colorful.
mhm,
He's quite brilliant, and so he is a director. He's a perfect example of a young director that is wanting to come back to practical. So
mm,
in these two movies, X and then Pearl, we did a lot of practical effects, gags, huge prosthetic makeups, full transformations, and then subtle ones, everything in between. I even had Kevin Wasner come to New Zealand for the first film for X, which was amazing because we had some, ambitious makeups, but also some ambitious gags. And
mm.
so he was a part of that, which was super cool. But
Yeah.
yeah, so yes, the rise of VFX, but also, kind of come in full circle. I hope the practical stuff never goes away. I don't think it will.
Yeah. I think the
Yeah.
last thing I saw that was just kind of blew my mind in that way was Pinocchio. I was just like, oh my God,
Oh,
they could have opted for VFX on so many occasions in that film and didn't. And it was so nice to see.
oh my God, that film and Mark's work, the makeup work by the whole creative makeup and hair department, Mark Coulier, and his work in particular blew my mind.
Mm,
And I got that feeling inside of me that I had when I, was watching the Star Wars films as a little girl, feeling like, oh my God, these are practical, these are characters. They felt so real to me because they were real.
yeah.
They weren't just, layered digital layers. They were practical, and you feel that in your bones. And I felt that in my bones. Pinocchio is a perfect example. And that was a film that came out last year, and it should be celebrated, and it will be celebrated. It just stunning and breathtaking, truly.
So, is that, if I was to say, what changes would you like to see moving forward? Is that one of the things that you'd like to see more of?
Yeah, yes. But in particular, we need to come back to atmosphere and graininess in film. Like I always talk
Lady,
about that.
amen. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're speaking my language.
Because, like clean, that
Yeah.
crisp, clean effect, that's good for sports and
Mm,
that's good for nature docos.
yeah, I totally
We
100% agree.
Yes, but it's not for film.
Mm,
We need that fuzz to come back. We want those, we want that softness, that graininess. We don't need to see every corner so crisp and clean. So that is my hope. That's my hope for change in the future. And that is, I feel that very strongly.
yeah, me too. Even if it's just as simple as my own personal well-being of being on set where they're just pumping in the atmos constantly because they don't want
Yeah.
it to look so clean and crisp and clear. I don't want to sit and smoke all day. Right through to
Wow.
the end result of actually watching it and being like, why?
Yeah. So I keep saying, let's come back to film, but obviously that's not the answer either. But they just need to create a new norm in which the HD it gives us that layer of graininess
Mm,
that we love and miss.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. The film I'm about to start they're shooting it on film,
Oh,
which is pretty
wonderful.
exciting. But I was like,
Wow.
oh, that's where the budget's going. Because, yeah, that's why everyone can't go back to film. It's just too expensive.
Yeah, it is, but it's going to be a really cool experience, Jamie Lee.
Mm.
Like that is, it will mean that things are going to perhaps be planned a little bit better. They can't be so, oh, we'll just do 20
We'll
takes.
just do rolling
Um,
resets for 3
yeah,
hours.
exactly. So within that will come all kinds of really cool revisits of, it'll be a revisit to the way things used to be done and hopefully better planning, which will, I'm sure you'll embrace. So,
Absolutely, lady. Of course. Love a good plan.
yeah.
Now, I would like to sit you in your trailer and have you all set up. You've got all your makeup and hair goodies and tools and everything in front of you. And if I was to come in and take one thing away from you, what would it be that would just stress you out? You'd be like, no, you
Oh.
cannot take that from me, please.
Oh my goodness. My team would be able to answer this question for me because they know how sacred and how sacred this item is. But there is an incredible artist from Australia, prosthetic makeup artist. Her name is Catherine Brown.
Mm.
And many, many, many years ago, she gave me a brush. And it's this little stipple brush.
Mm.
And it is looks like a disaster. It really does. It looks terrible and it's not pretty, but it is just the most beautiful. It gives me just the perfect amount of organic stippling, whether it be, for all my character makeups, but whether it be over an appliance or just direct onto skin, but I'm able to use, my wash down inks with this brush and just get a perfect end result. So it's like my blankie. I could probably survive just fine without it. But in my mind,
Mm.
if I don't have that brush, it's just all going down, it's going to hell in a handbasket.
And you've never been able to replicate it by finding something similar
I,
and bashing it into submission?
Yeah, I probably could, but it's a
Never be
little
the
bit of a
same.
gimmick now, me and
Yeah.
my brush.
Yeah.
So I feel like as long as it stays with me, then I don't need to make another one. I probably should, and I could,
Yeah.
but there's a little bit of a shtick I have with the brush. So
That's awesome. So I want to just ask a little, I know you can't talk about it too much, but the films you've been working on down in New Zealand are the next Avatar films with James Cameron, right?
yes.
Yeah.
I think the one thing to say is that, working with Cameron on his next two films has been, a huge honor. Like I said earlier, The Abyss, Aliens, they were all incredible films growing up. So now to be working with this director is pretty cool. And it's really challenging. The stakes are very high, but I will be very proud to have been a part of it, part of them, 2 and 3. I believe 2 is being released Christmas of 2022.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, so next year at Christmas time, year and a half away.
Yeah.
And then number 3 will be released, I believe, 2 years later. So that would be 2024.
Wow, that's awesome. And I don't know if you remember, Sarah, but it's the first time I ever met you was in the crowd room on the first Avatar.
It was Jamie Lee. I do remember that. I certainly do. And we actually connected right away. And then you and I did that little indie with our friend Biz and Hamish, our friends Biz and Hamish.
Yes.
And
I know, I remember seeing,
yeah.
I never saw any design concepts or anything for what you guys were doing. But then on the day, I was just like, holy shit. Who did you do that on? Ben, right?
Yes, it was
Full head to toe transformation.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah, it was fun. And we basically just pulled everything and anything we had in our kit. And I was like, all right, let's stick all these bits to him and then see what it looks like. And it was actually quite cool.
Yeah,
so
that was
fun.
awesome.
Yeah. Oh, and then of course you and I got to do a project a few years back, Jamie Lee, which was great with the Ted Bundy story and Zac Efron.
Yeah, that
all
was
of
fun. It was insanity and it was
Yeah.
fun. And we also did when you came for a little while on The Hobbit.
Yes, and you and I were working together on the one character, and
Mr. Mark Hadlow.
Mark Hadlow, of course. Yeah,
Team Dory.
Oh my goodness, that's right.
I
And that was right before. Yeah, that was right before I went off to Elysium. But
and all Mark would say, she's going off to be with Matt Damon. And I was like, yeah, you'll be okay. We'll be okay. It's all right. Oh, it's too funny.
Jamie. Do it again, girl.
Oh,
we'll do it again.
Yes. Now, I would like to know who you would like to hear on the podcast.
Oh, goodness. Well, I'm not sure. You say you've done 40 plus interviews. Wow. So I'm not sure if you have a Jane O'Kane or a Gino Acevedo in there.
I do not yet.
Those two.
They're on the list, lady. They're on the list.
Yeah. Howard Berger. I'm not sure if
I haven't spoken to Howard yet,
Yeah. And he is, just good value. He's amazing. Like, his scope of experience, everything he's done, and he's just a funny guy. He is, he's been a mentor, so I can't say enough about him. And then of course, you've got the Jason Dohertys out there, and at the top of that list would be Gino and Jane, I'd say.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Lady, I appreciate your time so much today, and it's been so awesome learning more about your story because there's so much I didn't know. Yeah.
Well, it has been amazing getting to revisit and talk through it with you, Jamie Lee, and congratulations on your podcast. There's just great little chapters and insights to everybody in our crazy little wacky industry. So thank you.
For links to see more about our guests, go to our Instagram at The Last Looks Podcast or our website, thelastlookspodcast.com. If you want to keep up with new episodes being released, be sure to subscribe through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, Google Play, YouTube, or any podcast streaming platform. And remember, if you're enjoying the show, share it. The Last Looks podcast would like to thank Brett Stanley and Sabrina Castro. The song Fun Time by DJ Quads. Thanks for listening. Until next time.
That's a wrap, people.